welcome to episode 28 of Aimless Ramblings. Now, today I've come up with a topic and we're going to be discussing beauty from a few different angles. And I'll kick off by discussing the idea of beauty as a commodity. So when I use the term commodity here, I'm sort of drawing on some of the writings of Marx. I know, terrible, but like the idea of commodity versus use value for an object. So a use value for like a pound of sugar, for instance, is its ability to satiate the cravings of sweetness in a bunch of people. Whereas the commodity value of sugar is based entirely upon its relative value in a capitalist system of economic exchange. So it might be, I don't know, $1 today, or, depending on how, if there's a massive breakdown at the sugar mill and there's, a dearth of sugar in the market, it might be $2 the day after. Or if there's a glut of sugar because Brazil has produced 10 times as much sugar as it needed, it might end up being 10 cents. Now, beauty is often looked in terms of aesthetics and the philosophical subdiscipline. There's always an argument as to whether or not there is true beauty, as in like a true standard of beauty. There's also an argument as to whether or not beauty is just normative. So, is beauty just everything that we agree upon? But I suppose one of the things that has come out of art, particularly as we've gone through the postmodern period of artistic development, avant-garde, etc., where people really radically redefined what art could be with things such as the ready-mades. And there was always an argument as to whether or not art should be a political statement, or whether art, should be expensive, or whether art should cater to elite tastes, or whether it should actually be a subversive political act seeking liberation. But what we have seen is that through the development of art, that in some ways the argument nowadays is art is whatever the curator is willing to pay for. And so beauty, and this is the question I suppose I want to throw to you, if we reject the idea that there is a true beauty, or a beauty based upon a use value, and I suppose Simon might want to contradict this a little bit later with what he's talking about, is beauty purely a commodity value? Is beauty merely what people are willing to pay for in terms of beauty products, in terms of beautiful art, in terms of the things they aspire to be on the internet, whether that be an avatar for a forum, or a piece of, who knows, /fic furry art that they're willing to pay an artist on DeviantArt for? What do you think? Do you think that there is some sort of solid basis on which we can ground beauty, or do you think beauty remains something that is forever going to be defined by the ethereal wants, desires, or even just whims of the masses? Simon?
Well, the main thing I always run into when discussing something like beauty is you have to work out whether are you talking sexless or sex-filled beauty, because that's the real big diviner of what exactly is the purpose of the beauty. So, for example, sexless thing is, not talking for everybody, but for the majority of people, they'll go out and they'll see a lovely, natural forest or something and go, wow, like this is really beautiful. Whereas a lot of, the encoded attraction meter put within a lot of human beings means that there is also a attraction beauty, which is sort of used as the template to see what is the ideal within them. And that's the main device that I sort of find when it comes to trying to determine beauty. As, for example, you were talking about art, like some people go, oh, wow, cool, that landscape is really beautifully done and whatnot. And then you were also talking about somebody who's a furry artist creating art that particular group wants. So it's that whole divide between sex-filled and sex-less art, and sex-filled and sex-less beauty. Anyway, Tim?
So I definitely agree in the sense, I suppose, that so beauty can definitely be encoded with emotion. And the issue here is obviously we're dealing with language that is inherently fungible but also kind of blurry. So there has been arguments made that this is sort of a rejection of the idea of beauty as commodity and sort of an embrace of beauty as use value, is this idea that our entire concept of beauty is actually just based upon evolutionary drivers. So, our desire for symmetry is based upon, the idea that a symmetrical mate is more likely to have, a healthy body and less likely to have genetic or environmental defects, so that they're more likely to give birth to stronger, better offspring. And similarly, that music, for instance, the beauty for music and music in terms of the rhythm that it provides sort of simulates in some ways being close to a heartbeat. And how when are we close to a heartbeat? I can think of two times. One, a lover's embrace, or two, when you're a small child on your mother's breast. So in some sense, there is an argument there that if we are accepting beauty as based upon some sort of biological basis, then this idea of beauty as commodity isn't necessarily true. Although I would argue that the fact that people are willing to push and bend those boundaries and also extend, and make quote unquote beautiful things that are completely irrelevant from a biological driver perspective kind of undermines that a little bit. Although I'll throw to Sam because I'm pretty sure he has something to say on that.
First and foremost, I truly think trying to link our appeal to things like, say, music matching a heartbeat. Truthfully, it always irks me slightly because it's not really anything that there's any evidence for. It's just, an opinion that everyone kind of goes, yeah, that sounds reasonable. And, once upon a time you got two pieces of meat and a bay leaf and you put it under a rock and that was the recipe for making a scorpion. And everyone, yeah, that sounds reasonable. Now, I've tried it and that doesn't actually make a scorpion. So let's make some stinky meat and a wet bay leaf. So yeah, I don't think we truthfully know or can even really speculate on why we find things. And I guess I'll put this up first. I would say beauty has nothing at all ever to do with sexual attraction, because that's attraction, not beauty. So you could be attracted to beauty, that's fine, and kind of similar to what Simon was saying, but I think is a little bit different because there's not sexual beauty, there's attraction. So you can find something attractive. I could find a landscape attractive if I was in that way inclined. But, you could also find a person beautiful without finding them sexually attractive. So I don't think there is such thing as sexual beauty. I just think it's attractivity. You are attracted to something by whatever drivers there are. And why do we find shit beautiful? I have literally no idea. It's probably some wiring in our brain triggering shit, but I think it is the broader concept. What's an example? So it's like you have a set of fish swimming, right? And you have a formation of that which is greater than any of the individual drivers of those fish. So beauty is, I think, one of those things where it emerges from the complexity of our neural setup, and so it actually sits above our primal drivers. Simon?
I personally just think it's our brain microdosing us to make us stay alive. That's what I think beauty really comes down to is this process of your brain just being like, hey, so how do we make you stay alive when you're not exactly fulfilling the base needs? I'm just going to microdose you a couple of times and then, problem solved. Sam?
Wouldn't that still truthfully apply to pretty much every animal? Which is why I was trying to dictate the difference between attractiveness and beauty. So, a mouse, they're going to need, their life's probably quite shit. They're going to need this continual positive reinforcement. So they get microdosed by the chemistry in their head to pass on the genetic material, right? But that's why I was trying to make the distinction between something like attractive, so something that is a positive stimuli response, and beauty. You can look at something and go, this doesn't fit within the framework required for survival. I have no evolutionary driver, really, for this to be triggering. So either it's triggering something as an accident or, it's an emergent thing.
I think you've raised actually a relatively important question, Sam. I don't know if we're going to tackle in this particular episode, but maybe animals do perceive beauty, and maybe if beauty is either an accident of brain chemistry or is an emergent property of consciousness, you know, like Thomas Nagel's book, what is it like to be a bat? Like, is that whole question of what is it actually like to be a different kind of animal with a different kind of mind, it's potentially with consciousness. So maybe, when your dog's out there frolicking in the park, they are experiencing true beauty in the form of the park. Anyway, I'll throw to Simon.
First and foremost, if you guys want to discuss more about the why we do things that don't particularly make us survive, we did a really interesting one all the way back, episode 10. We actually did one on therapeutic creation, which actually covers a lot of what we also covering here in a greater depth. I think Sam had one particularly about creation in great struggle. Anyway, passing on to me. Now, even though I dug myself in a hole and tried to, deter like sexual versus non-sexual attractiveness. So now I'm going to have to sort of try and drag it into this beauty sort of thing. So if we even separate sexuality, so like, sexual attraction and yada yada, if people are more, how do I put this, socially attractive, and we're going to, for purposes of this, sort of extend it to if somebody is of beauty, they've seemed to have sort of a sway in the criminal proceedings when it comes to exactly how heavy the sentence is or whether they get off on a particular things. A lot of these research has been done on the almost the opposite end of the spectrum, where people who are actively not seen as got the traits to have portrayed beauty have actually been seen to have like higher sentences. It was done in America, so they were actually more likely to get the death sentence and a bunch of other things. It was also really interesting to see that majority of very successful, so after they got caught, so they weren't that successful, but they were fairly successful. The ones that were, prolific con people were usually of about above average attractiveness, simply because that meant that they were more likely to get into particular situations where they could exploit it, whereas most people try and get out of situations. According to the research, not just me saying this, a lot of people will try and avoid being in situations with people that they don't already have some form of reasoning to be interacting with, and you can sort of use attractiveness / beauty as an exploit in that particular range. But yeah, now I'm going to use a bunch of this time to, pick apart the research. So as Sam's already shot me down a bit earlier on, am I just talking about attractiveness? Attractiveness is sexual attraction. But then also I feel like, as you were discussing, there's also that other element of, even if you don't have that, even if you have no sexual interest in an individual, simply by the societal expectations of whatever you want to call it, but it is just genuinely seen as more beautiful, we've been able to see that there's more of a outcome of you getting a lesser sentence. Tim, you want to say something?
Well, I think, Simon, that you are kind of onto something here, in the sense that beauty has always been socially correlated, or not necessarily always, but is generally socially correlated with the good. So, a hero in a traditional epic or poem or story is good looking, is beautiful. Like, I mean, whether you're talking about, Beowulf all the way through to Crime and Punishment, the main character who is male, and although, homosexuality in literature can be either implicit or explicit, like not necessarily always a sense of attraction between the author and the character, and since a lot of time it could just be a Mary Sue thing, like the author trying to portray themselves as attractive. But you look at the bad guys or the antagonists of these stories, generally they're displayed as ugly. And there is occasionally inversion of that, where you have like an ugly character who is, the underdog up and coming. But I suppose this is where the question comes, like, but then they are portrayed as having inner beauty, whether that be personal character or a personality, etc. So do you think potentially because we have been socially conditioned to think that, yeah, it works in the same way racism does. Like, if you're socially conditioned to believe that ugly people are inferior or more likely to be bad, do we feel sort of a knee-jerk reaction to that? Simon?
I feel like the reason why it can be so prolific as it is experienced in criminal justice is the judge in most cases has to sort of look at it in a holistic sense, and even the tiniest impurity of a slant can affect a judgment in its entirety. And as you were saying, like the sort of innate idea that, good looking or some form of innate thing, because they had the same sort of study with remorse, because remorse is this major element that allows you to get parole. And they said, not only was it that they found that people were more attractive, were more likely to be showing remorse, it was also gendered, because, regardless of other situations, because I don't know how they controlled for it, but they controlled for the surrounding situations. So, for example, they would be in the same sort of family with the same number of children, or they'd be single or whatnot. All other elements were sort of controlled for. If you were female, you were more likely to be showing remorse. I don't know if that was a sort of more of a social kind of idea that women show more remorse or something. I don't know the surrounding thing, but yeah. Let's go back to the thing. In relation to if you think it's sort of more of a racially biased or whatnot, definitely I think it is a contributing element. However, I also feel like it has a confirmation bias in the respects that if it happens early on in the piece and there's a positive outcome, because we all know the fifth pillar of the state is the media, and if the media are like, oh, look at this nice person that looks really nice on our thing, and that nice thing happened to him, so he deserves it. It's this self-fulfilling prophecy of the nice looking person that looks nice for our media outlets gets off. It looks awesome. So I don't know. I don't know if there's a media element to that, but it's messy. And as Sam regularly says, I probably should go and do in real science instead of just. But that's pretty much what my degrees were. Anyway, I'll hand it over to Sam.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Simon, it is interesting when we bring up the racial aspect of it again, because we talk about racial disparity in sentencing, racial disparity in terms of how people are handled, etc., through the judicial, legal, criminal systems, etc. If we talk about beauty standards and race are obviously a particularly hot topic item, and it's only really in the past 30, 40 years that we've seen. I mean, obviously people have been pushing harder beyond this, but we've seen sort of mainstreaming and changing in terms of, the represented models of beauty, like, for instance, hiring non-white models or models of color to, parade different items, different sort of things, and the availability of different shades of lipstick and makeup art, etc., makeup materials, etc., which enable people to then pursue aesthetic norms that traditionally would have only been reserved for a very small number of people. Well, in the concept of the world writ large, but realistically in these Western societies, the mainstream white complexion. And so do you think in that sense that the drive to change the narrative or broaden the narrative of what can be beautiful has potential ramifications in a legal sense from like a race politics perspective? And I'll throw it to Sam first because he's put his hand up.
I'm wondering again though because this is one of the issues I found with the topic, was separating the concept of beauty from attractiveness. Are we expanding the concepts of what beauty is, or are we expanding the concept of what attractiveness is? I mean, there would have been people, I'm sure, who, in the 1950s would have said that a black person cannot be beautiful. But that's because they're idiots, obviously. Like, if you had, say, whatever the innate characteristic that makes a person beautiful rather than attractive, I don't imagine, this expansion of makeup products or whatever is an aspect of that. I think it's an expansion of attractiveness rather than beauty, because, attractive is just, like 1960s Australia, homosexuality was illegal, I'm pretty sure. So, yes, we've expanded what is reasonable to be attracted to, and probably what we're comfortable in admitting is beautiful, but I don't know if we're actually expanding the range of what we'd consider beauty. Thoughts?
Well, I suppose, Sam, in that sense, like, you're raising an interesting point. Is there a, like, where does beauty sit in regards to attractiveness? Because if we were saying that beauty is something more than attractiveness, which, you go back to as far as Plato, like, beauty is, in the Phaedo, he talks about it. Beauty is merely the reflection of the true good that we've experienced as our souls in a previous life, and we feel attracted to this beauty because it is reflective of this, transcendent good. And I mean, that is a theory of beauty that's been pretty dominant in the Western tradition. Like when you talk about people like Aquinas, but before him, particularly Augustine, like in the Christian tradition, like the idea that beauty, like true beauty, isn't sexual; it's a reflection of God, and in the reflection of God, we're attracted to it because even in this much more diminutive and lackluster form, we see a reflection of the greater whole, and so. I think if you want to separate attractiveness from beauty, you have to kind of take a dualist position. It doesn't necessarily need to be a religious one, but there needs to be something like as a transcendent substrate upon which beauty can be based. Simon, thoughts?
I might be the same, but what I've kind of gleaned from us discussing this is sort of attractiveness is to seek out good. So it's like by the process of doing this, I will be reaching a point of good. Whereas beauty is the be good. It is that by enacting this particular thing or seeing this particular thing, it is good. So the act of whatever we're going to consider good, but like attractiveness is sort of this sort of leading us in a particular direction towards what is supposedly good. We're attracted to this because it will lead us to something. So, I might be attracted to climbing because climbing, I like what it will respond. I'll be able to climb things, and that's a really good thing for me. That's what I seek as good. However, the attraction to climbing is the fact that I want to reach good, whereas being able to sit there and absorb a particular thing, beauty in and of yourself is being good. Sam?
So could it be kind of said, like what you're putting out is like attractiveness is following neurochemical gradients for reward-based conditioning type thing. Like to stick with your climbing. You enjoy climbing because climbing gives you that endorphin rush. You get the nice view, which triggers, sense of security or whatever, because you can see far. Whereas beauty is not so much a thing that is being conditioned if we accept that beauty exists as a concept even. And it's just, something step above the conditioning. I don't know. It's a really difficult topic to actually try and nut out whether it can even actually exist. So yeah, you could be on something there, I think, Simon.
Yeah, I definitely would agree with that, Sam. And I suppose, we're talking about neurochemical gradients, or if there is a transcendent beauty, that kind of leads us to your topic.
Yeah, I was hoping to come more prepared for this, but there is an absolute lack of real information out there that I could find. So I was hoping to to discuss, we currently, in terms of entities we can converse with freely, are the only sentient entities on the planet, right? There are maybe others, but we can't freely converse with them, and so we're as good as alone, right? However, if AI ever truly takes off as in a bona fide actual entity, I was wondering, what would their beauty standards be? Would it just be the attractiveness? So would they, would you be attracted to an AI that's got incredibly slim, efficient coding? It's going to take less resources to process. Or, would they be conversely attracted to someone with incredibly sloppy coding? Because it's going to take more resources to process, which means, therefore, they have better hardware or whatever. So, who knows? And would they, for instance, this is thinking, taking the exception that it's like a proper AI, it's not just been trained by humans where we say this is attractive, this is beautiful. It's actually, done it long enough to, pull itself up by its bootstraps as such, if that's actually possible. And what do we think an AI would find beautiful? I'm going to throw Simon first.
Just genuinely going off my very limited, I'll preface with a very limited understanding of AI and general, sort of think banks sort of things, which I've sort of seen a little bit more, which is the sort of we feed it in, it spits something out. It'd be just really interesting to see what, because hypothetically, if we're going to say an AI, the AI's main purpose is it wants to learn. So therefore, would it want to go for... I feel like it would find beauty in the most complex, not as even the scrop thing, but the thing that is the most multi-leveled. So, but then is it like the different levels? Is that what it finds beautiful? Or is it the wholeness of the fact that everything might be in a quantum state? So if, therefore, if you can look at the whole entire picture and be able to go, yes, it can at any point be a 1 or a 0, does that mean that it can look at the same picture and get multiple different readings, and as such, that is what it would determine as beautiful? That's the only thing I can think of, is that sort of, if we developed quantum computing where something can be in 2 states at once, is that going to be the thing that creates something that can be considered beautiful by an AI, because it's learning from the same information, except the information changes every time it looks at it. Anyway, Tim, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I suppose this comes again to the question of, is the beauty transcendent or is it conditioned? And obviously we're going to accept that there's going to be some level of pre-wiring and pre-coding that exists within a mind. Like, a mind doesn't emerge as a tabula rasa and then, the last 40 years of, behavioral study, psychology, and neurobiology have shown that, there is a element of the mind which comes pre-wired. But I also think there's a very strong, post hoc conditioning. So potentially an AI will only find something attractive, and I know that you've said, Sam, not because we've told it, but from the environment and the society that AI is conditioned in. So if the AI is with a bunch of humans, which would be logical to begin with, it's probably going to pick up the human biases and directions towards beauty from that sort of social context. And then potentially, as societies and social groupings naturally evolve, if you have just a bunch of AIs who have taken their own snapshots from their own particular cultures and thrown together, they may develop their own standard of beauty. And so that the beautiful in that sense could be an emergent construct from the different social groupings that these AIs have been conditioned or developed within. The other thing I'd say, though, as well, is that if we do accept that there is a transcendent form of beauty, then maybe the AI will turn inwards and meditate and find, the beautiful in the same way that, a Neoplatonist would do something along those lines. Sam?
Oh, yeah, so I guess, it kind of also answers the question, or potentially would answer the question in this, century away hypothetical situation of whether or not there is actually emergent beauty. Because if, you have, say, a bunch of whiteys make an AI and then it finds only white people attractive, or says that white people are beautiful, or whatever, then very clearly either it's not that great an AI, or beauty does not actually exist, and it is only, different things triggering the attractiveness wiring in different manners. However, like you said, if it does manage to self-reflect and dictate its own concepts of beauty, like Simon was saying, if it has the capability to look at something that exists in 15 states constantly, and it can see, the intricate ballet that is, and it finds that beautiful, then, that is the emergent beauty, because it's something we can't perceive, so we can't code for it. Thoughts, Simon?
Yeah. After hearing your sort of breakdown of what I've said, it, really opened my mind to it. So in relation to Tim's first one, what came to mind when he was talking about, what happens when they deal with other AIs? It sort of just reminded me of that monkey study about like group learning in the respect. And I feel like simply by having one crack in that sort of perfect thing of AIs talking to AIs, you just create a seamless ripple effect of that one AI that interacted with humanity. By simply interacting with humanity that one time, it continues and ripples on through the whole entire progression of the AI, and in some ways taints the whole entire experiment just by simply that one interaction. Anyway, Tim?
Throw Sam.
When you talked about that, it just really, National Geographic I read probably like 20 years ago or something, was talking about tribes of chimpanzees in Africa, those that had close experience to humans and those that had like very, very minor experience to humans, and like the overall aggressiveness. And this could have just been environmental pressures, obviously, or something else. It's just an observant study. Essentially, those that had human experience were far less peaceful, far more violent than those that hadn't had human experience. And so, it could be that interacting with another mind that's close enough to yours invariably will, alter you. So, interesting.
Well, on that slightly downward note of potentially us sowing the seeds of our own Skynet destruction through talking to AIs, I think that's a pretty good point to close up. So thank you, everyone, once again for listening in, and we'll hope that you tune in next time.
This great warrior has left to his mighty Lord.